If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello, very good afternoon and welcome to a special bumper edition of the Briefing PM with me, Darren McCaffrey, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. Here's what's coming up over the next 2 hours. We'll be joined in the studio by the House of Lords' Claire Fox and Tom Harwood to look at all the latest political fallout from what's been a momentous week in British politics. What next for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson? Plus, a new poll puts the Labour Party 10 points ahead of the Tories. We'll speak to former Labour advisor John Mcternan about the ways that Labour can use the government's latest troubles to their advantage. And I'll be joined by the Lib Dems, the Tories and Labour MPs from across the political spectrum to look at what next for British politics and indeed what will happen not just to the Prime Minister but indeed to the government in the days and weeks to come. As always, do get in touch, send us your views. What do you make of what happened in that Downing Street garden, the Prime Minister's apology yesterday? Are you concerned? Maybe you're not. Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. A very good afternoon. Welcome to the programme. But first, at just after 2, here are the latest news headlines with Rosie Wright.
A very good afternoon to you. It is 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright in the GB News newsroom. Let's get you up to date. The Health Secretary says the isolation period for people who test positive for COVID-19 in England will be reduced from 7 days to a minimum of 5 full days. The changes come into force on Monday and they apply to those who are double jabbed. Sajid Javid says official data shows 2/3 of patients are no longer infectious after 5 days, and testing will help identify those who can leave isolation early.
After reviewing all of the evidence, we've made the decision to reduce the minimum self-isolation period to 5 full days in England. From Monday, people can test twice before they go, leaving isolation at the start of day 6.
MI5 say a Chinese agent is active in the UK Parliament. Intelligence analysts told the Speaker that the spy has been working with an MP in a bid to subvert the processes of British government. Raising a point of order in the Commons, former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith said it was a matter of grave concern and that there would be an overhaul of access to Parliament. Cabinet Minister Michael Ellis says Boris Johnson is a man of integrity and urged MPs to wait for the outcome of an inquiry into the allegations. He made the comments in the Commons earlier amid growing calls for the Prime Minister to quit, including from the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross. Boris Johnson apologised yesterday for attending a bring-your-own-booze party in the Downing Street Garden in May 2020, when the country was in lockdown. Well, today the Prime Minister has cancelled a visit to a vaccination clinic in Lancashire because a family member has tested positive for coronavirus. Voters in Lee in Greater Manchester are divided on whether Mr Johnson should stay in his job.
We'll look back at this and we'll probably say, you know, he's done a good job in the circumstances he was in, but could he have done things better? Yes, he could. Has he made mistakes? He certainly has.
He sounded all right at the beginning, but he's not now. He's just contradicted every rule he's made for everybody else to follow, but not doing it himself.
I think he's doing so bad with all this corona and that. I don't think he's done so bad.
It should lead by example. If he could go to a garden party, why couldn't I serve my customers?
Scotland's First Minister has been taking questions from MSPs in Holyrood over the financial support for businesses in the pandemic. We can find out more because our reporter Davy Donaldson is in Edinburgh for us live this afternoon. Davy, good afternoon. What has Nicola Sturgeon had to say?
Yeah, Rosie, she certainly was quizzed by the Conservative leader Douglas Ross, who's calling for Boris Johnson to resign, about that money for businesses that was promised before Christmas, the help for hospitality, that kind of thing, and that money hasn't transpired yet. Nicola Sturgeon says it's still awaiting all the forms to go through, but clearly businesses crying out for this money. We heard from the nightclub industry as well. They say that it's just a trickle of money that's coming through, and that's having a huge impact on them. We always heard from Anna Sarwar, the Labour leader here, who was quizzing Nicola Sturgeon about the NHS, and she didn't have too many answers for that, blaming it on Omicron and Delta.
Thank you, Davy. Of course, we'll keep you up to date on this story. Now, England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, is leaving his role at the end of March. He's been one of the key scientific figures during the coronavirus pandemic and was recently knighted in the New Year Honours List. The Prime Minister has thanked him for his invaluable advice. Prince Andrew faces the prospect of giving evidence in court later this year in New York. It's after a US judge threw out a motion to dismiss a civil sex abuse case against the royal. The judge ruled a 2009 agreement between his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, and the convicted sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein, didn't extend to the prince. Ms. Giuffre is suing Prince Andrew over claims he sexually assaulted her when she was 17. He denies all of the allegations. An attorney who represented 20 of Epstein's victims, Gloria Allred, says testifying under oath won't be easy for Prince Andrew.
He's going to have to do a risk analysis, Prince Andrew. And, of course, there's not going to be a settlement unless Virginia offers to settle and gets what she thinks she should get for a settlement. Her lawyers also have to assess the risk to her if she doesn't settle.
France has lifted its ban on UK holidaymakers. The French tourism minister says thousands of people who booked ski trips will now be able to hit the slopes from tomorrow. Fully vaccinated travellers will be required to have a negative COVID test within 24 hours of departure to go to France. They won't have to isolate when they reach the country. Police investigating the suspected murder of a woman in Ireland say no stone will be left unturned in bringing her killer to justice. Primary school teacher Aisling Murphy was killed on Wednesday afternoon in County Offaly. A 40-year-old man has been arrested and is being detained. The elderly are facing an energy emergency, according to a leading charity. Age UK says the predicted 50% rise in energy bills will hit millions of older people hard. They're urging the government to take action to lessen the devastating impact of soaring bills. Ministers say they're offering winter fuel payments of up to £300 per household. You are up to date now here on GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Right now, The Briefing and Darren McCaffrey.
A very good afternoon. Welcome to The Briefing. It is 7 minutes past 2 o'clock. If you were hoping to see Alex Phillips this afternoon, sorry to disappoint you. She's not feeling very well, so I've stood into the breach for the next hour to take you through the big political fallout. We wish Alex a speedy recovery, but a very good afternoon. It is all politics, and there is only one story in town. I think the Prime Minister hoped maybe for a slightly better start to the year. After a turbulent end to 2021, the year seems to have started where it did end, with lots of controversy and allegations around Boris Johnson, with some senior Conservatives now going as far as to say that he should resign. And that includes the Scottish Tory leader, Douglas Ross, who yesterday called on him to quit. The Prime Minister, of course, apologised, kind of, yesterday for attending a Bring Your Own Booze party in Downing Street in May 2020 when the country was in lockdown, saying effectively that he thought it was a work event. Well, today he's cancelled a visit to a vaccination clinic in Lancashire because a family member has tested positive for COVID. Many would suggest how terribly convenient that has happened. Well, I'm joined in the studio to talk through what has been a dramatic week in British politics and what next for the Prime Minister. We're joined by a non-affiliated peer in the House of Lords, Claire Fox, of course, and GB News' very own political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Very good afternoon to you both. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Claire, let's start, if we can, just with a little retrospective look back at yesterday. What was your sense of the Prime Minister's apology? He didn't, of course, say sorry himself. Rather apologising for what may have gone on, and the reaction that you've seen over the last 24 hours or so.
He looks suitably shaken, and it doesn't matter whether you think that that's because he felt that his political career's on the line, it could be all over. But it certainly wasn't a jolly hockey sticks performance, and it might have been carefully worded. He's presumably getting some advice by lawyers about what he can and can't say. But a lot of people feel that carrying on saying you've got to apologise more sincerely can end up being a bit counterproductive because actually it's gained a certain amount of sympathy with him. I say that rather nervously because I think generally speaking people are furious and upset. Over the weekend when Dominic Cummings, was kind of talking about parties, most of the people I spoke to, not political people necessarily, were like, oh, not more party stuff. But actually, when you saw what it was and the emails, I think people then did think, right, this really is making a mockery of us. It was a particular...
I think it was also the thing that he'd spent before Christmas saying that there were essentially no parties that he was aware of. And then it turned out not only was there a party, but there was one that he was actually...
But it was also that email, I don't want to rehearse it all. So I do think that the thing is not the parties, but people feeling that they've been taken for mugs. People then start thinking, well, what were we doing then? If they weren't scared, why were they scaring us? I mean, if the virus was so frightening, why would you all gather together? And then say to us that if you did that would be, and so on and so forth. One of the most damaging things, of course, has been we've got a date for the party. And as you know, one of the tactics or strategies or what have you is people coming forward saying, on that very date, I was at a funeral. On that very date, my brother died.
Or I wasn't at a funeral because I couldn't go.
But I was at a funeral where I saw somebody at the funeral of their child, and they weren't able to console the person whose child had, they weren't able to console the parents. So people have got these very vivid memories of the horrors of what lockdown meant. And I know I just was watching the programme before us and that interview with David Frost, and I think that one of the things is that where people are starting to say, it's in a way what this story has done is it's reminded people what it was like. And I think a lot of people had wanted to say, can we not go over how awful it was the last 2 years? This has brought back some terrible memories. And the positive thing I hope will come out of it, people will think long and hard before saying these are the kind of measures we need to implement again, which is what Lord Frost said, actually.
I was fascinated with Lord Frost also kind of alluded to, now this wasn't specifically in relation to parties, but was that because everyone was going into the office in Downing Street, when almost everyone else in the country wasn't, that things probably felt quite familiar.
Yeah.
And things didn't seem that extraordinary. Now, he said that's why maybe the government was so easy to impose restrictions, but also maybe why they felt it was easier to have parties. Tom, just in terms of what the Prime Minister did say yesterday, and we had a whole slew of cabinet ministers answering questions in the last 24 hours or so, the Prime Minister was very kind of clever, I suppose, in his wording, in that he didn't admit any wrongdoing yesterday. He apologised for the perception that there might have been mistakes.
Absolutely. He left the room open to say that, for example, Sue Gray could find that this was a party, and yet he would still be able to get away with saying that he thought it wasn't. Not that it wasn't a party, but that it was his perception that it was not a party. Thereby, when Sue Gray's report comes out, we expect early next week. It could well say that this was a party, and the Prime Minister could continue to say, well, that's news to me. I thought this was a work gathering in my garden that I attended for 25 minutes. Now, how much the people of Britain believe that excuse, and to be fair, it is an excuse, I think is open to interpretation. Certainly in recent polling this week, the proportion of people who think the Prime Minister has been less than truthful is incredibly high, and crucially, even incredibly high amongst Conservatives. You'd usually expect people who vote for the Labour Party and for other parties to think that the Prime Minister is untruthful. What's significant about some of the polling this week is Conservative voters think that the Prime Minister has been untruthful over this affair, and that, I think, is what is one of the main drivers behind his drop in popularity, which is an incredibly interesting phenomenon. He's never been particularly popular with people who voted Remain and for people who voted the Labour Party, but the idea of the hypocrisy of the affair, not the fact that everyone should have been allowed to go to parties or whatever, or the epidemiological status of working indoors with lots of people and then going outside with those same people for drinks. I think a lot of people can see epidemiologically that is not the biggest issue in the world. The problem that people, and particularly that Conservatives see here, isn't that the party happened, it's that other people were forbidden from doing that same thing.
Well, let's just get a sense about what the public mood is. We want you to get in touch, first of all, as well. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Tweet us at GBnews. Maybe you're not particularly animated by all of this and you wish we were talking about other things. Do let us know your thoughts. We're going to get to those a little later in the programme. But our reporter, Bradley, has been out and about in Lee in Greater Manchester, trying to get a sense of what the mood is there amongst the public amid these latest allegations.
We'll look back at this and we'll probably say, you know, he's done a good job in the circumstances he was in, but could he have done things better? Yes, he could. Has he made mistakes? He certainly has.
He sounded all right at the beginning, but he's not now. He's just contradicted every rule he's made for everybody else follow, but not doing it himself.
Like the saying goes, never trust a Tory. That's all you have to say, really, don't you? I should have resigned long ago.
So he's had a party. I mean, for all we know, he might have been following all the rules himself. We don't know, do we? I don't think he's doing so bad with all this corona and that. I don't think he's done so bad.
He should lead by example, and he shouldn't have been doing it, because like we were all on lockdown, we weren't allowed to open here because of what was going on.
I was closed for nearly 7 months, mate, and he should lead by example. If he could go to a garden party, why couldn't I serve my customers? And a lot of them, old ones, we don't see now because they died for COVID, or the truth's going to come out.
How do you feel about the whole situation? Tell me your thoughts. How are you feeling?
Let down. Miserable. We can't do what they can do. Why? He hasn't done what he's supposed to have done. He's the Prime Minister.
He's going to lead by
example. Tell the truth. Help people, don't hurt them, because he's going to lose a lot of people.
There you go, that's the view of people in Greater Manchester, speaking to our reporter Bradley Harris a little earlier on. Interestingly, the public opinion there overwhelmingly not in favour of what the Prime Minister had to say. Claire, where are we with the politics of this? Is this fatal for the Prime Minister?
So a key phrase used by one of those people interviewed was let down. And that's what I keep hearing. People feel let down. And
these are among his supporters?
They're his supporters, but also so many people made a huge... it was almost like a kind of existential sacrifice to vote Conservative at the last election, because they had to break with their family traditions, with their what were perceived to be class positions, because in the past, you know, it was like you voted Labour no matter what. So, you know, people had a lot of faith in him, right? And one of the things I keep thinking is, when you ask if it's fatal, one of the things that Boris has got is, you know, that idea that he kind of turns up and people like him and he can kind of, you know, and he's not the conventional politician, and people kind of feel, despite the Eton background, they can have a natter with him, relate to him. But you can't imagine him kind of just wandering around the crowds without people screaming and shouting, or, you know, in other words, I can't see how that's going to happen anyway. But I think, we have to not just be reactive. I think he'd already lost his populist touch. I think that a lot of the stuff that we'd seen around COP26, when he seemed to think that net zero was a big popular campaign, you could see him rowing back from some of the consequences of Brexit and wanting to play safe. So even before this, I think that you could say that Boris was already looking a bit shaky for people. I don't think, however, it is immediately fatal. I just simply think that he will not be remembered as a great Prime Minister, and he fancied himself, apart from anything else, as some great Churchill figure.
It wasn't so long ago that, I think it was about 4 months ago, that in the pages of the Telegraph we were hearing reports that Boris Johnson was talking about his premiership wanting to be longer than that of Margaret Thatcher.
It was going to be the Boris decade.
Exactly, and I think it's really interesting to pick up on that populist point. There's an interesting thought experiment you can play with Boris Johnson policy over the last 2 years, and that's what would Boris the Telegraph columnist make of Boris the Prime Minister? And I think for maybe 2/3 of the decisions that he's made, 2/3 of the policies that he has presided over, whether it be lockdowns, tiers, tax rises, COP26, everything else, you can imagine the scepticism and indeed mockery that would befall the pages of Boris Johnson's Telegraph columns were he writing about.
Instead, there's been a lot of stuff around today that his premiership is hanging by a thread and whatever. We only do have 4 Conservative MPs who've publicly come out and said he should resign. That's a long way off the 54 letters that need to trigger a race. Though we do have this interesting dynamic that in Scotland, all of the MSPs, all 31 of them have said he needs to go. That's very tricky. Who do they support in the next election if Boris Johnson is still their leader?
But that's why you see, because we can end up fetishising just him. That's what I'm saying, is I think there's a crisis within the Conservative Party more broadly. It is undoubtedly the case that nobody knows who to go for, so there's no one natural. You know, we could all sit here now and do that. Is it Liz Truss? Could it be this? Could it be that? But the truth is, there's nobody outstanding. I mean, as it happens, one of the outside favourites who doesn't necessarily want it is David Frost. You know, everyone I talk to says he's the only man with integrity still left.
The first person since Lord Salisbury to lead from the Lords.
Exactly. I'm not suggesting it. I'm making the point that we're not. There's not a sort of rich choice on offer.
And if we remember back to 2016, when there was that leadership contest, when David Cameron stood down, everyone was expecting it would be a Boris figure, it would be a Brexiteer, it would be a Michael Gove figure. Who came through the woodwork? We ended up with Theresa May.
Exactly.
Nothing's a certainty in Conservative leadership contests.
OK, guys, we're going to pause there for the time being. That's Claire Fox and Tom Harwood, who are going to remain with us throughout the programme. We're going to take a quick break, though. Coming up next, what does this mean for the opposition, for the Labour Party? They have stormed ahead in the polls, one out last night, suggesting they are now 10 points ahead of the Conservative Party. We'll be speaking to a former Labour advisor, John Mcternan, in just a couple of minutes, and getting your reaction to what you make about this story, what you think should happen to Boris Johnson. But before all that, let's bring you up to date with the weather, and it's glorious across pretty much all of the country.
Hello again. A dry day for the vast majority, and there'll be some decent sunny spells for many as well. But it will be cloudier and breezier in the north, especially the far north of Scotland, where there will be some outbreaks of generally light rain and drizzle through Thursday as these weather fronts approach. And you can see the tighter isobars there bringing a breezier day for much of Scotland. But closer to the area of high pressure that dominates things further south, we've seen a frosty and in some places foggy start to the day. And in fact, in 1 or 2 spots, those fog patches could continue into the early afternoon, particularly Devon and Somerset. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine for much of England, Wales, eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland seeing some brighter spells as well. But thicker cloud for the north of Scotland, a strong wind here. However, it is mild, 10 or 11 Celsius. Colder further south, where we see especially some fog lasting into the afternoon. And that fog quickly reforms during the evening. Some dense fog overnight then, perhaps more widespread compared to the last couple of nights, and especially for the West Midlands, the Welsh Marches into the West Country. And a frosty night to come, widely below freezing across England and Wales, but milder for Scotland because of the cloud and more persistent rain there heading into Orkney and the far north of the mainland. Staying breezy in the far north, the winds eventually moderating across the Northern Isles during tomorrow. Otherwise, light winds further south, and that will allow some of those dense fog patches to last again into the early afternoon. And where that happens, temperatures will really struggle. They won't really lift it above freezing, I think, in 1 or 2 spots, particularly around river valleys, where that fog lasts. Again, fog becoming more widespread once more into Friday nights, especially this time across central, northeast and eastern England. I think a bit breezier further south, so low cloud more likely here, and Cloudy skies will be the theme on Saturday, perhaps becoming a bit clearer on Sunday, but many places stay dry.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that has been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here. Joe Biden walking out. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Very welcome back to The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey. It is 25 minutes past 2 o'clock on TV and on DAB radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Now, a YouGov poll published for The Times today is showing a pretty dramatic decline in support for the Conservative Party, and now a 10-point lead for Labour. It's the party's biggest lead since December 2013, nearly a decade ago, and it puts Labour's support at 38%, the Conservatives at 28%, and the Lib Dems doing pretty well at 13%. Let's get a view on all of this by joining John Mcternan. He's a political strategist and was a Labour advisor. John, very good afternoon to you. This is clearly a significant lead for the Labour Party, though perhaps unsurprising. If they weren't doing well now, you'd have to raise some serious questions.
It's a very, very good result for Labour. And yes, it would be bad if Labour weren't doing well, but Labour were incredibly damaged in 2019. We mustn't forget the Prime Minister has an 80-seat majority. He won a landslide. He won ground in almost every Labour area across the country, apart from London. This is a remarkable turnaround in a very short period of time, just over 2 years since the election defeat of Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party. So it's more than simply a normal midterm. It's a massive recovery for Labour from the worst defeat since the 30s.
And now, John, you used to advise people like Tony Blair. What do you think Labour's strategy is about calling for the Prime Minister to resign? Because in some ways, when the opposition call for the leader or for the Prime Minister to resign, it makes it almost less likely, because it appears that you're caving in to what the opposition party wants. What do you think was going through the kind of special advisors and the advisors in the Labour Party, suggesting to Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner and others that they should call on the Prime Minister to resign?
So you'll see from the smaller parties, the Liberal Democrats and the SNP, there's an instinct to call for the Prime Minister's resignation on almost anything. And that is wrong. You become the patron saint of lost causes. If you keep calling for resignation, that's never going to happen. So what Labour have been doing is waiting until the moment. And the thing about great barristers, and Sir Keir Starmer's a great barrister, is you don't hit the opponent every time they're weak. You hit them when they're at their absolute weakest and give them a decisive blow. And what Keir was actually saying, he was saying, and his advisor will have been advising him to do this, he was saying what the Tory backbenchers were thinking. So you're right, a call for resignation can unite the party. In this case, it's united the backbenchers of the Tory party going, yeah, that's what we think too. And I think as they go home this weekend to their constituencies, they'll be doing surgeries, they'll be in the high streets, and they'll be feeling the full force of public opinion. Everybody who I know who had a terrible, tragic event on the 20th of May, who's in my family circle and my broader friendship circle, are telling me what happened to them on the 20th of May 2020. We're going to see a lot of that happening to Tory MPs, and I think that they'll come back feeling the country has moved. And that's what Keir was putting, was that I'm saying what you're thinking. How are you going to do it now? Are you going to put the Prime Minister out of his misery, put the country out of his misery?
In saying that, there's a train of thought that may well suggest that actually Labour might be better with Boris Johnson, particularly a bloody and wounded Boris Johnson, remaining as Prime Minister, rather than, a fresh Prime Minister who might be significantly better in terms of opposition for Keir Starmer. Wouldn't it be better for Labour maybe to keep Boris Johnson in his job?
Look, I think in the end in politics, a scalp is a scalp. Politics is a contact sport. And you can't try and hold somebody in place because you think that the next person might be better. The thing is, if the Tories do replace him, it will be the fourth Prime Minister in 5 years. And that tells you something about the chaos inside the Tory party. That tells you something about a lack of stability. And that tells you about a party who at the next election are looking for an unprecedented fifth term in a row. There haven't been 5 terms in a row since we had democratic elections in the UK. They're tired out. It's time to have a rest. It's time to renew and refresh. Absolutely. In opposition, that's what the voters do. And there comes a moment when the voters make their mind up about you. They did that with Gordon Brown. They gave him a chance. He could have had an election in 2007. He'd probably have won it or formed a government after it. He didn't. And people went, well, we're going to have to put you, we're going to have to put you into opposition while you sort your party out. It's taken us 10 years. We're back in the race now.
Quickly, John, though, but realistically, and you mentioned this earlier, talking about historic precedents, the Conservatives got an 80-seat majority. It would take a swing not seen since, I think, the Second World War, bigger than we saw in 1997, for Labour to win that election. That is too large a hill to climb, surely, in just a couple of years.
I think a majority is still hard to see. However, it takes a 10% swing for Labour to form a majority government. It takes 5% for the Tories to be in a place where they cannot form a minority government. That's the challenge for them. The SNP will never support a Tory government, so they've got a bigger hill to climb to maintain themselves in a winning position. So 5% swing, that's plausible. 10%, that looked like a dream until recently. This is a big, big gap now between Labour and the Tories. And the question the Tories will be asking themselves and their pollsters is this the floor? Have we hit the floor, or is there further to go?
Okay,
Theresa May went down to 17 at one point.
Okay, John, appreciate your time. John Mcternan there joining us down the line, former Labour advisor. Just very quickly, guys, before we go to the news bulletin, what do you think, Claire, Labour need to do to really capitalise on this?
I don't want to give them any advice, but I'll tell you what they shouldn't be doing is, well, one thing is Andrew Adonis, Lord Adonis, tweeted out saying Boris is end of Brexit. Well, actually, he's done Boris a lot of favours there, because it's actually rallied a lot of leavers around, and people are beginning to say, oh my God, if they're going for him because he's Brexit, that's bad, right? And secondly, I think that this idea that you should always just go for the rule breakers rather than the rules. I think it depends where the conversation lands. I think a lot of people are reassessing what the lockdown period was. And let me tell you, the Labour Party continue to be the most vociferous, most zealous restriction supporters And they have to take some responsibility for what was happening on the 20th of May when people were desperately miserable and not being with their... because they advocated it. So I think they're being too smug. I thought Jan Mcternan was rather complacent there.
Just very, very quickly, Tom, in saying that, there is a sense that Keir Starmer, who also didn't have a very easy 2021, it must be said, until towards the end, has in some ways stepped up to the mark to a degree, particularly at Prime Minister's Question Time, but not necessarily resonating with the public as much as he would hope.
Well, you're right. He was generally considered to have had a strong performance yesterday. The question is, how do they allow this moment to go on? Of course, we saw a similar dip in the polls for the Conservatives in December. By January, the first week in January, they had begun to tick back up in the polls. The Labour Party's challenge is that it's the Conservatives that are making mistakes, not necessarily the Labour Party that is capitalising on them in a long-term way. They need to have a long-term vision rather than just going for the moment, potentially setting out even some policy, dare I say it.
Oh, there we go. Tom Holwood, Claire Fox, thank you for staying with us throughout the programme. We're going to get to your views in just a couple of minutes. gbviews@gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us. It's just after 2:30 though. Time to bring you up to date with the very latest news. It's back to Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it is 2:33. I'm Rosie Wright in the GB News newsroom. Let's get you up to date. The Health Secretary says the isolation period for people who test positive for COVID-19 in England is going to be reduced from 7 days to a minimum of 5 full days. The changes come into force on Monday and they'll apply to those who are double jabbed. The government's been under pressure to bring the situation in England into line with the United States, where the isolation period there is already at 5 days. Cabinet Minister Michael Ellis says Boris Johnson is a man of integrity and has urged MPs to await the outcome of an inquiry into a Downing Street Drinks Party allegations. It's as Boris Johnson is facing growing calls to quit as Prime Minister from some senior Conservative MPs. Boris Johnson apologised yesterday for attending a Bring Your Own Booze party in the Downing Street Garden in May 2020, when the country was in lockdown. Today, the Prime Minister cancelled a visit to a vaccination clinic after a family member tested positive for coronavirus. MI5 say a Chinese agent has been active in the UK Parliament. Intelligence analysts told the Speaker there's been a covert agent working with an MP in a bid to subvert the processes of British government. Raising a point of order in the Commons, former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith said it was a matter of grave concern and there would be an overhaul of access to Parliament. Police investigating the suspected murder of a woman in Ireland say no stone will be left unturned in bringing her killer to justice. Primary school teacher Aisling Murphy was killed on Wednesday afternoon in County Offaly. A 40-year-old man has been arrested and is being detained. England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, is leaving his role at the end of March. He's been one of the key scientific figures during the coronavirus pandemic and was recently knighted in the New Year Honours List. The Prime Minister has thanked him for his invaluable advice. You are up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. We'll have more for you shortly. Later on, back to the briefing with Darren.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Very welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. It is 20 minutes, or almost 20 minutes, to 3 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. Lots of you getting in touch. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Rax has tweeted me on Twitter saying, I really don't care about Partygate. She sends me a picture of what that wine and cheese event in the Downing Street Garden, saying it is not a party to me. It's folk who've been working 18 hours a day together, debriefing and winding down after a press conference, one of the hottest days of the year, with a drink. She says that no one's talking about all the TikTok videos or NHS dances. Someone else, Jacqueline Stanford, saying, Dear Darren, please stop kicking Boris when he's down. I do not believe he has been 100% since COVID. Yes, he's been an idiot, but he's done an awful lot. Don't run like hyenas. Nikki's emailed in saying people drinking outside were people who worked in Downing Street. They probably worked day and night, more hours than anyone trying to get the country on a firm footing during a pandemic. If they needed a drink to relieve the stress, then so be it. Vicky, they were enjoying the nice weather and mocking us. Any invitation that says bring your own booze is a party. Johnson must go. Timothy says we have all been let down. I pray that he's replaced by a better Conservative. And finally, Alison, I think the main issue with the parties is the fact that they went up every day on the podium and scared the public while they were partying. GB Views at gbnews.uk. We've reflected a wide range of views there. We always want to hear what you're thinking. Do get in touch and we'll get to them a little later on in the programme. But let's turn away from the politics for a second to another major story in the last day or so, and that is that a New York judge has ruled that Prince Andrew will face a civil sex abuse trial in the United States later this year. Virginia Giuffre claims that she was sexually abused by the Duke back in 2001 when she was only 17 years old. Prince Andrew has strenuously denied, of course, all the allegations. Well, let's speak to the royal commentator, Richard Williams, who joins us down the line. Richard, very good afternoon to you. Whatever way you look at it, the options essentially going forward for Prince Andrew are all pretty terrible.
They're all absolutely awful. If he ignores future developments, there will be a judgment almost certainly against him. If he cooperates in this process, we've next got the so-called discovery process where he would be cross-examined by the legal team of Virginia Roberts Giuffre. Not a prospect he would look forward to, not to mention the international circus that would occur if it actually went to a civil trial in New York. I mean, one, remembering what happened on Newsnight when he was interviewed, I mean, it's too ghastly to contemplate. And so far as settlements are concerned, well, I mean, that is the obvious solution, but some 95% of civil cases in America end up with settlement between both parties. But what would she accept? I mean, it does appear from what her legal team have indicated that it's more than money. It might be an apology, and would it include an admission of guilt? So this we don't know, but I mean, all of these options are unpalatable to him. What will happen? We simply don't know. There might even be more evidence coming out that we've not heard of.
Richard, and the problem is that if it is settled, and that does probably seem like the most likely outcome, that even if it does only involve money, in many ways, in many people's eyes, it will be an acceptance of guilt.
Well, of course, and he has vociferously insisted that he is totally innocent. The problem is, firstly, the court of public opinion after that so-called car crash interview on the Newsnight. I mean, it was one of Krakatoan proportions. It was utterly ghastly. No one's ever forgotten it. And, I mean, that was terrible. Then there is his promise, which he hasn't fulfilled so far as we know, to cooperate with the FBI in trying to trace Epstein's accomplices. It's not been proven that he personally has done anything wrong. Then photographs that haunt him, the 2001 photograph with him with his arm round Virginia Roberts as she was then, with the convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell in the background, not to mention the photograph of him and Epstein, which has not been disputed. And also, during Maxwell's trial, we saw the photograph of Maxwell and Epstein at Balmoral. This is appalling. So it's very, very difficult to see precisely how this is going to play out. There's the Queen's Platinum Jubilee year. It's historic. And this is casting a very definite cloud over it.
Yeah, and just on yourself, we know that Prince Andrew is famously her favourite child, or so it's reported at least. How damaging is this, not just to the royal family and its public image, but to the Queen personally?
Unquestionably. I mean, she was able to spend more time with Andrew. Charles was born in 1948 when, as Princess Elizabeth, she was preparing to take on huge responsibilities, which she did take on during his early years. And there's little doubt this will be very, very sad and very much a cause for concern for her. There is no question about it, as she prepares on the 6th of February to commemorate a milestone, and we celebrate in June, which the whole country needs this prolonged or this lengthy bank holiday for 4 days, which should be magnificent and spectacular.
OK, Richard, really appreciate your time. That's Richard Fitzwilliams there, royal commentator. Join us with the latest on Prince Andrew and those options. As I say, that none of them look particularly appealing for the Prince going forward. Claire Fox, Tom Harwood, still with me in the studio. This is quite a difficult moment in the sense that, not just personally for Prince Andrew, and difficult maybe for good reason, but this is meant to be a celebratory year for the royal family. We've never seen a platinum jubilee in this country before. It's terrible timing, isn't it, Claire?
Yes, but I think that, I mean, everybody untangles, the Queen from Prince Andrew. There's been all the sagas about Harry. It's been a complicated time for the royal family, and I wouldn't wish Andrew's plight on any family. I have no sympathy with him.
Well, you mean the Queen is kind of seen as almost separate from all of
Almost separate. But I do think that it gives a sense, and I mentioned it earlier, of something rotten at the heart of the establishment. I do, that's one of the things I'm worried about in people's loss of faith or trust in the political process, and then you have a situation where everything is like, oh, they're all at it, it's a horrible atmosphere. No, to be fair, Prince Andrew obviously led a life of degenerate arrogance where he didn't think any of the rules counted, and he continued to believe he was immune from prosecution. Well, the reason he thinks that is because he is. Because the truth is that the royal family and the people who run society are largely beyond being held to account. We don't generally get to see this, so we're just not used to seeing people in the royal family being treated, as it were, as mere mortals. I've got no objection to when it happens, but the fallout, I think, is more damaging if people start to become nihilistic and cynical about everything.
Tom, just in terms of that, about the perception of all of this, if we look from outside the UK, because, there's been an awful lot of focus on so-called global Britain, and yet largely the press of Britain in recent months has either been the trials and tribulations of our Prime Minister and Prince Andrew. It's not a great look for Britain, is it?
It certainly isn't, although I can't help but think that the minds of people, not only in this country but further afield, have already been made up on Prince Andrew. And really what happens now in this matter doesn't really change what's already been litigated in the court of public opinion. And even if he were exonerated...
Unless even more damaging allegations were to come out, maybe.
I'm not sure how much lower he can sink. I think looking at some of those sort of opinion poll ratings, the number of people in this country specifically who still have a favourable view is incredibly, incredibly low. So I'm not quite sure what more could be lost, really, or even if any future set of litigations were won, how much that would help him. But you're right, these two stories are not doing well for brand UK. Although I would say that there are some publications, particularly overseas, that have never really had a good understanding of what the UK is about. There was a story on the front page of the New York Times, I believe, yesterday, which bizarrely alleged that the government was trying to outlaw protest. Now, a lot of people can have a lot of things to say about some of the proposals of this government in terms of specific forms of protest, but to say that protest in and of itself was being banned is hyperbolic, to say the least. Although, so to some extent, these descriptions have never been the most accurate.
I would like a caveat. It is the case, however, that the government, getting carried away with itself in the police and crime bill, have introduced such draconian, ridiculous, over-the-top regulations that for once I'm defending the New York Times, which is rare, because they have caricatured what happens in the UK, but in this instance, they were rather too close to the truth. And if you don't want to come over as an authoritarian regime, don't act like one. That would be my advice to the government.
Only on GB News and on the briefing could you end up going from Prince Andrew to protest in Britain in the space of 30 seconds. OK, we're going to pause again, guys, on that. Claire Fox, Tom Harwood in the studio. We're going to take another quick commercial break. Up next, what are the political implications for Boris Johnson? PMQs yesterday. We'll be looking at where his party goes to next. Also hearing your views, and we'll be hearing from a selection of MPs in the next hour or so. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
Hello again. A fine winter's day out there for many of us with plenty of blue sky, but there will be some frost and fog forming overnight, especially where we've got the clear skies today. The one exception, Scotland, where tighter isobars around the periphery of this high is leading to stronger winds. And as these weather fronts approach, some more persistent rain arriving later on in the afternoon and overnight. Initially for Shetland, then into Orkney by the evening, and then eventually into the far north of the mainland. That strong wind accompanying the rain as well, so quite a contrast here compared to further south, where across much of England and Wales, lighter winds and clearer skies will lead to some widespread fog and frost as we start off tomorrow morning. Temperatures, even in towns and cities, several degrees below freezing, so really quite a cold start across much of England and Wales tomorrow morning. And watch out for those dense fog patches, especially for the West Midlands, into the Welsh Marches, the West Country as well. Some of these could persist into the early afternoon. But away from those, plenty of sunshine breaking out across much of England and Wales. Some brighter spells for Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland as well, but thicker cloud and rain tending to fizzle out across the north and northwest of Scotland. It's mildest once again in the northwest of Scotland, 10 degrees here. Feeling quite cold further south, especially where we get that lingering fog. Temperatures really struggling through the daytime. And then that fog reforming once again on Friday evening and into the early hours of Saturday. Most extensive as we start off the weekend across eastern England and perhaps the Midlands as well. Elsewhere, some low cloud and mist in the south, and for Scotland and Northern Ireland staying generally cloudy but milder here, whilst widespread frost once again is expected across parts of England and Wales on Saturday morning. So chilly start to the weekend with that frost, and a gloomy one, especially in the east and across the south with areas of low cloud, mist and fog. And it's a cloudy theme through this weekend, but some areas will be lucky enough to see some sunshine, particularly in the north and particularly on Sunday.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Very welcome back to the briefing here on GB News, 7 minutes to 3 o'clock. Thank you for your company on this Thursday afternoon. Now, as we've been discussing, yesterday's Prime Minister's question was pretty tough on the Prime Minister, certainly one to remember, one that he will not forget. Boris Johnson, as we know, was forced to apologise for attending a Bring Your Own Booze party in the Downing Street Garden back in May 2020 when the country was still in lockdown. However, he had to face pretty angry opposition, MPs calling for him to resign, and almost near silence from his own MPs sat behind him. So what sort of performance did he put in? Joining us now to discuss all this is the communication and body language expert, Judy James. Judy, good afternoon to you. I saw some commenters saying he looked like a naughty schoolboy, browbeaten in many regards. What did you think of the Prime Minister's body language yesterday?
I'd argue with that slightly. I mean, I think the timing is important. We had 14 minutes of quite dramatic humility, and it was very, very well performed humility. I have to say at the start, I thought for a moment that he was about to resign. It was almost an animal display of humility. He had his head was lowered. He lost all of that normal puffed up and naughty schoolboy act. Funnily enough, he'd managed to get rid of that for the first 14 minutes. And we saw a man who was speaking in a lower vocal tone. He lost all the verbal fillers that he normally uses, the ums and the ers that he puts into his speeches normally. His eyes were down. He looked extremely downcast. And as I say, for 14 minutes, this was a very, very impressive performance of humility that I think was quite affecting. He very much had the emotional advantage because we normally see him as this naughty schoolboy who's looking quite smug, who looks as though he's not being too serious. Suddenly to see that go and to see this display of humility, it could have been quite affecting. It was the fact that after 14 minutes, he began to reinflate, a bit like a lilo. He reinflated, and then we saw the old Boris come back. So I think in a way that took some of the authenticity away from the haired shirt that he was wearing at the start of PMQ.
And I suppose that's the question I want to get at is lots of Tory MPs were suggesting it was a fulsome and sincere apology. Is it possible to kind of deduce that from his body language?
He looked apologetic. I'm going to split a lot of hairs here. When you get a genuine, authentic apology, they're as rare as hen's teeth because they tend to happen immediately. So if you do something wrong and you suddenly realise you've made a mistake, I mean, if you roll your trolley over somebody's foot in the supermarket, you would be genuine with your apology. You'd see absolutely congruent, authentic body language. The longer the gap between the event and the apology, you're not really going to see that level of authenticity. So what you tend to see there would be somebody who wanted to show that they were taking it seriously. And I think he managed to be quite convincing about that. Even when Keir Starmer was roasting him from across the dispatch box. Normally, as you know, we see opponents sitting there mocking, shaking their heads, chatting, looking down at their notes. But I've never really seen this before. Boris did actually look at him. He used eye contact with what looked like a degree of respect. But I have to emphasise, that was only for the first 14 minutes. After that, all of the old Boris body language came back and we got the mocking displays and the head-shaking displays. I have to say that I think that Keir Starmer helped him because I think he gave him quite an easy ride in Parliament. He's maybe not right for the job for moments like that, which is where I think in a way we were expecting to be mopping up the floor after that PMQs, and that would have required an extremely congruent emotional display of probably anger from the opposition. And because Starmer's had the career that he's had as a lawyer, I think he's probably learnt to suppress those emotions too much. So we heard angry words, but his body language was pretty incongruent. He threw his arms out a bit, but they were bent at the elbows. When you looked at his hand movements, there was no sign of the kind of bristling tension that you get when you're really annoyed with somebody. So not as convincing as it could have been.
OK. Judy James, appreciate your time and your analysis. Judy James there, communications and body language expert, joined us on GB News. Claire Fox, Tom Harwood, we have got 1 minute, so 30 seconds each. Just the bigger, wider picture, where does this leave our politics now in terms of the room and the decisions that Boris Johnson's going to have to make in the days and weeks to come?
January the 26th is very important because that's the day when he's going to have to decide about regulations. And I already see people saying, if you dare keep restrictions in place. And also with things like the NHS 100K, which are those health workers who are objecting to being mandated for vaccines, some of them vaccinated, by the way, on principle. They're getting a lot of airplay in the media. And they're beginning to say, look, we are not being forced by you to have a vaccine when you won't keep the rules.
Tom, 20 seconds.
Sorry.
Different situation here. He needs to worry about his MPs less than the electorate for these next crucial months. That means keeping his MPs on side and maybe making a big play to go further than repealing Plan B restrictions, potentially to declare the pandemic over, be the first country in the world to declare that, to strip away some of those restrictions.
Hear from me.
Potentially, that could move the conversation on.
Fascinating, isn't it? That kind of what seems like trivial could have big policy implications for all of us. Claire Fox, Tom Harwood, really appreciate your time over the last hour. You're watching GB News. It is coming up to 3 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. And a very good afternoon to you. You're watching a special 2-hour bumper edition of the Briefing PM, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey, and here's what's coming up over the next hour between 3 and 4. We're going to be joined by MPs from all the major political parties to weigh up on what is next for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, what will be the fallout from PMQs yesterday. And after Jacob Rees-Mogg's comments in the media rounds last night, we'll ask what impact will this have on unionism and on Scotland. And as always, and we've got lots of your views, do get in touch. We want to hear what you think about this. Do you care? Maybe you don't. Maybe you really do. gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. That's all coming up between now and 4 p.m. But first, at 3 is the very latest news and Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Rosie Wright in the GB News newsroom. Let's get you up to date. The Health Secretary says the isolation period for people who test positive for COVID-19 in England will be reduced from 7 days to a minimum of 5 full days. The changes come into force on Monday and they apply to those who are double jabbed. Sajid Javid says official data shows 2/3 of patients are no longer infectious after 5 days, and testing will help identify those who can leave isolation early.
After reviewing all of the evidence, we've made the decision to reduce the minimum self-isolation period to 5 full days in England. From Monday, people can test twice before they go, leaving isolation at the start of day 6.
MI5 say a Chinese agent is active in the UK Parliament. Intelligence analysts told the Speaker there's been an agent called Christine Lee working with an MP in a bid to subvert the processes of British government. Raising a point of order in the Commons, former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith said it was a matter of grave concern and there would be an overhaul of access to Parliament. Cabinet Minister Michael Ellis urged MPs to await the outcome of an inquiry into the Downing Street drinks party allegations. It's as the Prime Minister is facing growing calls to quit from some senior Conservative MPs. Yesterday, during Prime Minister's questions, he apologised for attending a bring-your-own-booze party in the Downing Street garden when the country was in lockdown. Well, today, Boris Johnson has cancelled a visit to a vaccination clinic in Lancashire because a family member has tested positive for COVID. Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross has been heavily criticised by fellow Conservative MPs after he said Boris Johnson should resign. Today, Scotland's First Minister said that showed Westminster's contempt for the country.
As we've just seen, have big political differences with Douglas Ross, but even I'm not as derogatory about him as his own Tory colleagues are being. Not a big figure, lightweight. These might be personal insults directed at the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, but actually they say something much deeper about the Westminster establishment's utter contempt for Scotland. If they can't even show basic respect for their own colleagues, what chance do the rest of us have?
Well, Nicola Sturgeon was taking questions from MSPs over the financial support for businesses in the pandemic. We can find out more and go live to our reporter Davy Donaldson in Edinburgh. Davy, afternoon to you. What did Nicola Sturgeon have to say about business?
Yeah, she was quizzed by Douglas Ross there about which Douglas Ross claimed that the money hadn't been forthcoming. The money was promised to businesses prior to Christmas hadn't been forthcoming. She says that the government and local authorities are working on that to try and make sure that businesses receive the support that they deserve. Of course, a lot of businesses have struggled during the pandemic, mainly the hospitality industry, and she's hoping that that money can be laid out soon, and hopefully businesses can help them recover from the pandemic.
Davy, thank you. Now, England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, is leaving his role at the end of March. He's been one of the key scientific figures during the coronavirus pandemic and was recently knighted in the New Year Honours List. The Prime Minister has thanked him for his invaluable advice. Prince Andrew faces the prospect of giving evidence in court later this year in New York. It's after a US judge threw out a motion to dismiss a civil sex abuse case against the royal. The judge ruled a 2009 agreement between his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein didn't extend to the prince. Ms Giuffre is suing Prince Andrew over claims he sexually assaulted her when she was 17. He denies all of the allegations. France has lifted its ban on UK holidaymakers. The French tourism minister says thousands of people who booked ski trips will now be able to hit the slopes from tomorrow. Fully vaccinated travellers will be required to have a negative COVID test within 24 hours of departure, but they won't have to isolate when they get to the country. You are up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, back to the briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
A very good afternoon. Welcome to the Briefing PM with me, Darren McCaffrey, on TV and on DAB radio and online, of course. Lots of you getting in touch. But the major story in British politics this week, calls, of course, for the Prime Minister to resign, not just from the opposition, but indeed from some Conservatives too. Lots of you emailing in. Cornelius says that if it wasn't for the government, we'd all still be in lockdown, just like the Netherlands and most of Europe. Trundle says the public know that if they get Boris to go, we'll be back in the EU with Labour. Rob says Boris has a track record of being sacked for lying. The story continues, just a question of time. The country wants and deserves honesty and integrity, something Boris just doesn't have in his DNA. Stephen says, wow, we must not forget that half the country voted, or nearly half the country voted to remain. They will jump on anything to get Boris out. And Ruth says, not a fan of Boris, but he shouldn't resign at this point. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Get in touch. We're going to hear a whole range of different views, what you're thinking at home on this story. Well, staying with it, because, as I say, the Prime Minister is facing growing calls to quit from some senior Conservative MPs, including the Scottish Tory leader, Douglas Ross. Boris Johnson, of course, apologised, kind of, yesterday for attending a Bring Your Own Booze party in Downing Street back in May 2020 when the country was in lockdown. Today he's cancelled a visit to a vaccination clinic in Lancashire because a family member has tested positive for COVID. Well, joining me now on the show is the Liberal Democrats MP for Orkney and the Shetland, Alistair Carmichael. Alistair, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Good afternoon.
You guys want to see the Prime Minister to resign. Frankly, many within his own party, many others are saying, well, we need to wait for this investigation. It's a bit quick to ask him to resign when, frankly, we do not know all the facts.
Well, I think you have to understand that the purpose of the investigation that you're talking about is to illuminate. It's not to insulate. Now, the admission that the Prime Minister made yesterday was one that, frankly, contradicted everything he had told us previously. And, you know, from his point of view, and the point of view of his ability to maintain confidence in a government and actually to give the country the leadership that it needs at a time like this, I don't see what more there is left to investigate. Boris Johnson yesterday convicted himself out of his own mouth. And, you know, this isn't going to go away for him. This isn't going to get any easier. And really, the only way for him now actually to draw a line and to do something that's in the national interest is for him to go.
Well, in many ways he didn't, though. I mean, it might have been very carefully chosen words, but he suggested that mistakes might have been made, not necessarily by him, and that the event, which he thought was a work event, might technically be within the rules. So it's not, frankly, actually terribly clear that he personally has broken any rules at all.
When you hear the stories of people who, in much more straightforward circumstances, were charged by the police, who were the subject of fixed penalties and criminal prosecution and the rest of it. And when you hear those heartbreaking stories about those who were wanting to have contact with loved ones in latter stages of life, who cancelled the weddings and everything else, and then you see Boris Johnson turning up and having said, first of all, that there were no parties, and then having said, well, there might have been parties, but, you know, I knew nothing about them, and then actually having been shown to have been at one and saying that he didn't know it was a party. You know, even if what he says is correct, this is the man that we're going to send in to negotiate with the likes of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier. And he doesn't actually know that when he goes into a gathering of people with food and drink on the table, that he's at a party. It's just not credible.
Whatever you perceive about what may have gone on, whatever you deduce from his argument, my fundamental point still remains, as in he claims he thought it was a work event. We don't know all the facts. That's why it's been investigated. We haven't had Sue Gray's report yet. The police are not investigating this. At the moment, you seem to be convicting him of doing something wrong or perceiving that he's done something wrong without the actual evidence from anyone else that he has done.
Well, first of all, as I said to you earlier, Boris Johnson convicted himself yesterday out of his own mouth when he admitted having done things that he previously had denied that he had been doing. So I think that's fairly straightforward. But look, you don't just have to take my word for it. There are any number of Conservative backbenchers, including very senior people like Sir Roger Gale, Caroline Noakes, and of course Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party. And as I understand it now, the entire parliamentary party in the Scottish Parliament all share my view. It's simply just not tenable. And for as long as he remains, then he is a distraction from the business of government at a time when we need a functioning government like we've never needed it before.
Just very quickly on your reaction to Jacob Rees-Mogg yesterday describing Douglas Ross as, I think, lightweight and insignificant.
Well, I mean, on the one hand, I never cease to be entertained by the spectacle of Conservative MPs biting chunks out of each other. But I think it is quite telling, and it undermines the position of the Scottish Conservatives here, because they have made significant advance in recent years by saying that they are the people who are best placed to protect the future of the United Kingdom. In fact, you can only protect the future of the United Kingdom if you have got a government that demonstrates respect for the political process both in Edinburgh and Westminster. And what Jacob Rees-Mogg did last night was to demonstrate that as far as so many people at the heart of Boris Johnson's government is concerned, that respect simply isn't there. It was grist to the mill to Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP. And, you know, for the sake of a difficult day for the Conservative Party, they have yet again acted in a way that actually undermines our future national interest.
And just finally, Alistair, while we've got you, just on a completely different subject, MI5 revealing this afternoon that a covert Chinese agent has infiltrated Parliament to lobby MPs, make donations to those that want to become MPs. Ian Duncan-Smith has raised this, wants the government to make a statement, has branded this an issue of grave concern. What are your thoughts on this story, and how do you think the government should react?
Well, I should declare an interest here. I am chair of the all-party groups, first of all in Hong Kong and secondly on the Uyghur Muslim population who have been the subject of a genocide at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. So I absolutely share the concerns that Ian Duncan-Smith expressed today, and I was absolutely shocked when I heard the news that this had been allowed to happen. We need to find out how it was allowed to happen and make sure that this sort of thing cannot happen again. The fact that the Chinese government think that this is in their national interest really ought to be a bit of a wake-up call to many in Parliament and in government about how we have to engage with China going forward. OK. Alistair Carmichael, Lib Dem MP there for Orkney and the Shetland Islands. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Appreciate your time on this Thursday afternoon, joining us from Parliament. In the studio, delighted to say, still with me, it is Lord Baroness, yes. Lord Baroness? Baroness.
Or Lady,
Fox,
of course.
Or Lady Fox. And very own Tom Harwood, who's simply a Mr. Tom Harwood.
For the moment.
For the moment. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's focus on Scotland, because it's fascinating, two aspects of this story. First of all, that all MSPs in the Scottish Parliament and their leader, who's also an MP, have called on the Prime Minister to resign. Claire, why is that?
So one of the things that I think it could indicate is a certain opportunism in the Scottish Conservative Party, who see it in their best interest to distance themselves from Westminster. And you know, in some ways that would indicate the party loyalty is broken down. And I also think there is something rather, by the way, there is something slightly disloyal. Before I attack Jacob Rees-Mogg for attacking them, I also do think, God, if you actually are just going to all kind of go, oh, we don't want anything to do with you. I mean, they are members of the Conservative Party. They're elected members of the Conservative, and he was their leader. All I'm saying is they denounced him. So then you get this public tit for tat, which is, and by the way, Ruth Davidson, who's actually in the Lords, the Baroness, she also was very keen to kind of distance herself. If they think they're going to buy off Scottish voters by somehow kind of doing this distancing, they're actually doing damage to the union as well, let alone anything else, in my opinion. But then just on Jacob Rees-Mogg, I was flabbergasted that the way that the official Westminster Conservative Party would deal with this would be to denounce the leader of the Scottish Conservatives in, as a little man, as kind of not quite up to the job. I mean,
it did seem a little odd that he seemed to be suggesting that the Secretary of State for Scotland, appointed, of course, in Westminster, was more important than the leader of the Scottish Conservatives elected in Scotland.
Exactly. He said he's a substantial figure, didn't he? But I mean, when we wonder why, political parties are kind of falling apart and people are worried about splits, is a behaviour like that. We've seen it, by the way, in the Labour Party as well. And I do want to say about the Lib Dem contribution, who's saying about the shocking way that people were arrested and put into prison and not fined massively in May 2020, that having sat in the Lords with the Lib Dems, I mean, they're demanding that people are arrested and fined now they're not wearing masks on tubes, right? They've completely,
I thought they opposed Plan B, though.
Oh, no, they oppose a very small part of it, and they're very, very excitable when it comes to ensuring that every rule is carefully policed and that actually we're being too liberal, ironically. So I just think that's why people get disillusioned with politics in general.
Tom, just on Scotland again, there's a real concern, I think, aside from what Claire has said, amongst some Scottish Conservatives, maybe people like Ruth Davidson, where they feel that Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg just don't get it, that they actually aren't quite damaging for the union. They're clearly not very popular in Scotland. And that's the necessity to try and put this kind of quite substantial distance between kind of the Scottish Conservative Party and those, or some of those at Westminster.
Let's not forget the situation by which Douglas Ross became leader of the Scottish Conservative Party. He was someone who resigned from Boris Johnson's government over the Dominic Cummings affair. And by making a big stand over that, saying that he would resign as a minister over that scandal, it made him appear in a difficult position over this one. And equally, once Ruth Davidson came out in the way that she did, in the vociferous way that she attacked Boris Johnson, I think it became very hard for Douglas Ross, who in many ways is seen as Ruth Davidson's protégé, to act against that. And then, of course, once the leader of the Scottish Conservatives has said something, the idea that his MSPs would then be disloyal to him, that puts him in a very difficult position. So I think it was then inevitable that all of the MSPs, all of the Tory MSPs, would have to follow suit, because it would be very odd if there were splits in Holyrood as well as Westminster.
But doesn't this reinforce, and actually if you are a unionist, incredibly concerning, that this pandemic has essentially signified that, you know, a lot of what has happened in people's lives has been decided in Holyrood, not in London for people who live in Scotland, and that's opened up a division. And now we've got, even within the Conservative Party, almost two different parties functioning at the same time.
The Conservative Party has never known how to manage devolution, and let's not forget that devolution was done in such a haphazard way. One of the original ideas behind it was you'd have regional chambers across England as well, and it would be more balanced. We've got asymmetric devolution. We've got a United Kingdom Parliament where English MPs sit alongside Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish MPs, and we've got a sort of semi-version of English votes for English laws, but it's not particularly clear, and you've got this incredibly difficult situation where is the Scottish Conservative Party operationally independent? Whose authority do they absolutely lean to? And you've got this tricky situation that the Conservative Party has never really settled.
And Claire, that's my point, is that if you are in Swansea, if you're in Aberdeen, if you're in Lisbon, actually, Boris Johnson has come across as the Prime Minister of England in the last 18 months, 2 years.
One of the great mistakes I think that Boris Johnson made, and these are kind of things I really want him to be held accountable for rather than Gardengate or whatever it was, Partygate, is, I think, was basically saying that the devolved administration would deal with public health rules. I mean, I live in Chester, and I'm, you know, over the border from where I'm from, which is North Wales, and it's 3 miles. And I don't know if you followed that thing about Chester Football Club and all that. But what you've got there is you've got this situation where, literally, to go and see my family or friends, there's completely different rules. And Mark Drakeford, who, to be frank, wasn't a figure throughout the UK widely known, and wasn't
Barely
in
the
time,
Labour
you know,
Party,
exactly. Now it's kind of like this big sort of, you know, I am, and I'm in charge, and it's been completely irrational. So I actually think that they've fueled this sense of different I mean, Northern Ireland has always been slightly different, but I do think that they've given huge weight to the breakup of the union, I'm afraid. I mean, it might have been unintentional.
But it's allowed people to, particularly some broadcasters, show Nicola Sturgeon at her press conference as if that is as significant as Boris Johnson at a press conference, as if they're leaders on the same level. Whereas in reality, we should look at them as leaders a level down, because it's a level of devolution.
I know.
It's
not a moral question.
Khan has more people who vote for him than Nicola Sturgeon.
But at the same time, if you lived in Aberdeen, frankly, actually, what Nicola Sturgeon's been saying over the last 2 months had more consequence in your life than Boris Johnson.
No, I know, but she shouldn't have had, because the UK government should decide what happens in the UK.
We're going to have to pause it there, because we're going to take a break. That is Claire Fox, Tom Harwood joining us in the studio. It is 20 minutes past 3 o'clock. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to get in the view from within the Conservative Party and indeed the Labour Party MPs joining us in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's cross over to Exeter, the Met Office, and frankly, what is the best winter weather? Sunshine, blue skies, and a little chilly.
Hello again. A fine winter's day out there for many of us with plenty of blue sky, but there will be some frost and fog forming overnight, especially where we've got the clear skies today. The one exception, Scotland, where tighter isobars around the periphery of this high is leading to stronger winds, and as these weather fronts approach, some more persistent rain arriving later on in the afternoon and overnight. Initially for Shetland, then into Orkney by the evening, and then eventually into the far north of the mainland. That strong wind accompanying the rain as well, so quite a contrast here compared to further south, where across much of England and Wales, lighter winds and clearer skies will lead to some widespread fog and frost as we start off tomorrow morning. Temperatures, even in towns and cities, several degrees below freezing, so really quite a cold start across much of England and Wales tomorrow morning. And watch out for those dense fog patches, especially for the West Midlands, into the Welsh Marches, the West Country as well. Some of these could persist into the early afternoon. But away from those, plenty of sunshine breaking out across much of England and Wales. Some brighter spells for Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland as well, but thicker cloud and rain tending to fizzle out across the north and northwest of Scotland. It's mildest once again in the northwest of Scotland, 10 degrees here. Feeling quite cold further south, especially where we get that lingering fog. Temperatures really struggling through the daytime. And then that fog reforming once again on Friday evening and into the early hours of Saturday. Most extensive as we start off the weekend across eastern England and perhaps the Midlands as well. Elsewhere, some low cloud and mist in the south, and for Scotland and Northern Ireland staying generally cloudy but milder here, whilst widespread frost once again is expected across parts of England and Wales on Saturday morning. So chilly start to the weekend with that frost, and a gloomy one, especially in the east and across the south with areas of low cloud, mist and fog. And it's a cloudy theme through this weekend, but some areas will be lucky enough to see some sunshine, particularly in the north and particularly on Sunday.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
A very welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. 27 minutes past 3 o'clock. We're on TV, online and on DAB radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company on this Thursday afternoon. Now, we're talking about Boris Johnson, the fallout, of course, from the latest allegations, that apology in Parliament yesterday at Prime Minister's Question Time. Downing Street suggesting today that we may not see the Prime Minister for the next week or so. He is limiting his movements following a member of his family testing positive for COVID. Some might suggest quite convenient timing in all of that. Well, let's get the view of Labour, of the opposition, and join the Ellesmere Port and Neasden MP Justin Madders down the line. Justin, very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us on GB News. First of all, just your sense of where we're at politically now with the Prime Minister. His argument is we need to wait for Sue Gray's investigation. That might only be a week away, and that surely is the sensible approach.
Well, I don't really know what we need to wait for, because it's as clear as day that he's broke the rules. Worse than that, he's lied about it repeatedly. Don't forget, he first of all told us that there were no parties, and then when evidence came forward that parties had taken place, he said he was shocked and said that there was going to be an investigation. Then finally, when evidence came forward that he had actually attended at least one party, he actually then admitted being there. So he's not been straight from the start. He's lied to Parliament. He's broke the rules he's set. His position is untenable. We don't need a report to come to those conclusions. And every day the Cabinet come out and defend him and keep him in his job is another day their own reputations, and indeed the reputation of this country, continues to be tarnished.
In saying that, there's an awful lot of people angry about this, but there's an awful lot of people who think, frankly, this was nearly 2 years ago. I don't really care about it very much. Why are the opposition, why are the government getting on and doing the things that people care about, whether that's the cost of living crisis, whether that's some of the other big issues facing the country? Isn't that what the Labour opposition should be focusing on?
Well, that's one of the reasons why he's got to go. There are lots of issues that this government need to be dealing with, not least the cost of living crisis. And of course, COVID is still a huge issue as well. And I can tell you, and I'm sure every other MP can tell you as well, that their inboxes are absolutely full with people incandescent with rage about what has gone on here. They've missed funerals, they've missed births, all sorts of massive issues in their life. They've not been able to be with their loved ones because of the COVID rules. So when they see the Prime Minister of this country, the man who set the rules, breaking them, they know that this situation is untenable. And until he goes, I think there's going to be no other story in town. So that's why he has to leave office as soon as possible.
What would you say to those people who think, though, that actually the opposition calling for him to go almost makes it more likely he's not going to go, because Tory backbenchers won't want to be seen to be giving in to Keir Starmer and MPs like yourself?
Well, of course, the people who will ultimately decide his fate are those Conservative MPs, and I think that they need to stand up and be counted. And we've had a few come out of hiding in the last day or so to say what they think, but we need more of them to do that, because I'm sure that they are getting the same response that I am getting, which is that people are disgusted by what's happened and they don't think Boris Johnson should remain in his job. I don't think there's anything other than a resignation appropriate. I do worry that he's going to keep dragging this on for as long as possible, but I'm sure that the net is closing in on him, and it's up to those Conservative MPs to do the right thing, see the writing is on the wall, and get him out.
But in saying that, we don't know the full details. The Prime Minister claims this was a work event. There's a civil service inquiry into it to find out the actual facts. The police are not investigating this. You're almost convicting him on the perception of what might have gone on rather than the actual reality, because in the end, we don't know that. That's why he and others are insisting we have to wait for Sue Gray's report. I don't see why that's a ridiculous position to be in.
Well, it's the only position he can adopt, because he's already admitted to being at this party. He knows what he's done. I wouldn't be surprised if there have been other breaches that he is keeping undercover at the moment. But the idea that he went into the garden, saw that this party was going on, and felt that he couldn't say anything to his own staff when he's been telling the country what they can and can't do for the last 2 years is completely pathetic. He knew that was against the rules. He should have acted then and there. And I suspect it just shows actually a deeper malaise in Downing Street about a relaxed attitude towards COVID regulations.
Very finally, Justin, before we let you go, this report, I'm sure you've seen it this afternoon from MI5, saying that there's a Chinese covert agent who's infiltrated Parliament, working for MPs, potentially giving donation to politicians. Ian Duncan-Smith, I think, calling this a matter of grave concern, expecting the government to respond. I mean, what do you think the government should do? How concerning is this?
Well, it is a worry, and actually we know from other countries around the world that the way some of the Chinese state operate is to try and by influence with politicians in those particular countries. So we need to really get to the bottom of what's gone on. I don't think that any individual MP would knowingly become an aid to the Chinese state, but clearly we need to make sure that the rules are tight enough to remove any possibility that can happen.
OK, Justin, appreciate your time. Justin Madders there, who is the Labour MP for Ellesmere Port. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on this Thursday afternoon. OK, we're going to pause there on the briefing. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes, right with you until 4 o'clock. Don't forget to get in touch with us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, particularly on the subject of the State of the Union. We'll be discussing that in just a couple of minutes. But first, it's back to Rosie with the news headlines at just after 3:30.
Good afternoon. It is 3:33. I'm Rosie Wright in the GB News newsroom. Let's get you up to date. The coronavirus isolation period for people in England is being reduced from 7 days to a minimum of 5 full days from Monday. People coming out of isolation will need to test negative on day 5 and day 6. MI5 say a Chinese agent called Christine Lee has been active in the UK Parliament. Intelligence analysts told the Speaker she's been working with an MP in a bid to subvert the processes of the British government. Raising a point of order in the Commons, former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith said it was a matter of grave concern and there would be an overhaul of access to Parliament. Cabinet Minister Michael Ellis says Boris Johnson is a man of integrity and urged MPs to await the outcome of an inquiry into a Downing Street drinks party and the allegations. The Prime Minister is facing growing calls to quit after he apologised yesterday for attending a bring-your-own-booze party in the Downing Street garden during lockdown. Well, today, Boris Johnson cancelled a visit to a vaccination clinic shortly after saying a family member had tested positive for coronavirus. England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer Jonathan Van Tam is leaving his role at the end of March. He's been one of the key scientific figures during the pandemic and was recently knighted in the New Year Honours List. The Prime Minister has thanked him for his invaluable advice. Prince Andrew faces the prospect of giving evidence in court later this year in New York. It's after a US judge threw out a motion to dismiss a civil sex abuse case against the royal. The judge ruled a 2009 agreement between his accuser Virginia Giuffre and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein didn't extend to the prince. Ms Giuffre is suing Prince Andrew over claims he sexually assaulted her when she was 17. He denies all of the allegations. You're up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and, of course, DAB Plus radio. Shortly, back to the briefing with Darren.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
A very good afternoon. Welcome back to the briefing on GB News. It is coming up to 22 minutes to 4 o'clock. You're watching us on TV, listening to us on DAB Radio and joining us online. Thank you for your company on this Thursday afternoon. Big week for British politics, big week for Boris Johnson. Let's speak to the Conservative MP for Christchurch, Sir Christopher Chope, who joins us down the line. Sir Christopher, thank you very much indeed for joining us on GB News. The Prime Minister apologised yesterday, didn't he? I say apologise, he kind of apologised because he still doesn't think he's done anything wrong.
Well, I thought his apology was fulsome and abject, and I've never heard such an abject apology in over 30 years in the House of Commons. And I would have thought that the reasonable people would say, well, now he's apologised, let's wait until the outcome of the Sue Gray inquiry and make sure we know all the established facts before passing a final judgment. And that seems to me a reasonable thing to do.
But Sir Christopher, he didn't apologise in the sense that he didn't personally say, I'm sorry for what I did. And he also said that technically he thinks the event was probably within the rules. So I'm not entirely sure what he sincerely apologised for.
He sincerely apologised for not having intervened and told people to go back to their rooms and clear out of the garden on that evening of the 20th of May 2020. And he accepts that he made the wrong judgment in not doing just that, and instead spending some 25 minutes in the company of these people who were in the garden. So that's what he's apologising for, and he's apologising for the anger which so many people feel, and certainly I do as well, because I opposed the lockdown rules to which we were subject at that time, and it's a source of anger to me and a lot of colleagues to find that in number 10 it seemed as though those rules were being ignored. But let's put our anger on one side and say, well, look, the man's apologised, and hold our final judgment until we hear from Sue Gray, which is a reasonable thing to do to ensure that the facts are established by her. And she will establish in her inquiry whether or not this was in breach of the law or whether it was just very ill-advised.
But the problem is that that might well hold if, frankly, the excuse didn't seem so ridiculous. And I say that because, I'm sorry, Sir Christopher, if you turn up in the middle of lockdown, having just told people you're not allowed to meet more than one person outdoors, and you walk into your garden and you see dozens of people, not just gathered, not socially distancing, drinking alcohol and eating food, and you don't immediately conclude that that is a party, well then how the hell can you be Prime Minister? I mean, that is unbelievable. It sounds fantastical to me that you could ever not think that that is not a party.
Well, I don't think that the Prime Minister is saying he didn't think it was not a party. What he's saying is that what happened at that time and the way he behaved was wrong. And he's apologised profusely to the House of Commons and to the nation for his conduct on that occasion. And it seems to me only reasonable that we should wait until the Sue Gray inquiry so that we know the full context in which
the
this
problem,
behaviour took place.
But the problem, Sir Christopher, sorry, is that he says he only realised in hindsight, that it was a party. He thought at the time, probably until very recently, that it was a work event. That's the problem, though, is that just people do not believe that. That comes down to the core of it. They just do not believe that someone could walk into their own garden, see people drinking and eating food during lockdown, and not conclude that they were having a party.
Well, that's a matter for... I can't influence people's beliefs. All I can say is that for my part, I share the anger and disappointment at what seems to have happened. And I heard the Prime Minister's abject apology yesterday. And I think that in the light of that apology, it is reasonable to wait for the outcome of the Sue Gray inquiry. And it's interesting, isn't it? We may get the outcome of that in a few days. And it's interesting that people are obviously nervous about that inquiry, not actually confirming their prejudices, because otherwise they'd be quite happy to say, let's wait for the inquiry. And why isn't Her Majesty's opposition saying, let's wait until we hear the inquiry? And then if they want to, on the basis of what's found, then they can renew their calls for resignation and reprisals. But why not wait until the inquiry?
Yeah, indeed. I put that point to the Labour Party. Just finally, before we let you go, Sir Christopher, just on Scotland's, we know, obviously, Douglas Ross has taken a different position from you and many of your colleagues. But how helpful is it for the Conservative Party, frankly, for the Union, that you have a Cabinet Minister in Jacob Rees-Mogg essentially claiming that Douglas Ross is insignificant and a lightweight? I mean, that's not only just rude, but it's damaging, isn't it, to the Union?
Well, I think what Jacob Rees-Mogg is saying is that in government, you have collective responsibility. And if Douglas hasn't got any confidence in the Prime Minister and in the Conservative administration, then he should give up the office which he holds and as leader of the Conservatives in Scotland. And that's the point that Jacob Rees-Mogg is making. He's not doing anything other than that, and pointing out that the person in question is not the Secretary of State for Scotland, and the Secretary of State for Scotland has confirmed his support for the Prime Minister continuing in office.
OK, Sir Christopher Cho, really appreciate your time this afternoon. That's Christopher Cho, the Conservative MP. Join us down the line. Appreciate you coming on GB News. Lots of people getting in touch. Jill has just tweeted saying, where were the people who were in the garden at number 10 on that date in May were not the same people, or were the same people, so working together inside in some kind of bubble on a daily basis. Boris Johnson said yesterday that he realised now that he should have sent them back inside, kind of inferring essentially that these people were working together inside. So what difference does it make if they were gathering outside? GB Views at GBNews and we will get on to your different views on this, and you've got lots of different views a little later on in the programme. First, though, let's bring you up to date with that story about an MI5 saying that a Chinese agent is active in the UK Parliament. In the last couple of minutes, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, said that she is deeply concerned by this. Let's speak to our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, who joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Mark. First of all, just give us the context of what MI5 are saying this afternoon.
Yeah, this is a very unusual move by MI5 to issue an alert to the parliamentary authorities, which has then been disseminated by the Commons Speaker and the Lord Speaker to MPs and to peers, warning them about this individual, an individual named as Christine Lee, who has been really immersed quite a lot in recent years in parliamentary activities, making contact with members of parliament, with politicians and aspiring politicians, offering funding too, with the goal, with the aim, according to the security services, of interfering and subverting the democratic process in this country. Now, in this alert, MI5 says that Lee had undertaken in covert coordination with the United Front Work Department of the Chinese Communist Party, with funding provided by foreign nationals located in China and Hong Kong. It goes on to say that Lee had extensive engagement with individuals across the UK political spectrum, including the now disbanded all-party parliamentary group called Chinese in Britain. Now, Christine Lee has apparently said in her defence that she was just engaged in trying to better achieve good cooperation and working between the Chinese community in the UK and the rest of the UK community. We know that one of the politicians that has been linked to this woman is the Labour MP, the senior Labour MP, Barry Gardiner. Now, the members' interest, the Book of Register of Members' Interest, states that some £700,000 has been donated in recent years by this woman, much of it going to Barry Gardiner's office to fund researchers in that office, including Christine Lee's son, who worked for the MP until just this morning as a diary researcher, but has now resigned from that post. In his defence, Barry Gardiner says that he had been in contact with MI5 for a number of years, liaising with them closely, and they were more than aware of this individual, Christine Lee, and he didn't think there was anything untoward.
OK, Mark, appreciate that update. Mark White there, Home Affairs and Security Editor, joining us down the line. The Home Secretary saying she's deeply concerned by that, but the UK has measures in place to identify foreign interference. We'll keep you updated on that developing story throughout the afternoon here on GB News. Let's move back to our top story, the fallout from PM Goose yesterday and the threats to Boris Johnson's premiership. Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg has been told to have a long lie down after he accused Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, of being a lightweight. The leader of the Scottish Tories said he disagreed with criticism from Mr Rees-Mogg as a war of words erupted following calls for the Prime Minister to resign. This is what the Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon had to say on this week's developments. Well, we don't really seem to have that word from Nicola Sturgeon. I think we now do. Let's listen.
I think, as we've just seen, have big political differences with Douglas Ross, but even I'm not as derogatory about him as his own Tory colleagues are being. Not a big figure, lightweight. These might be personal insults directed at the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, but actually they say something much deeper about the Westminster establishment's utter contempt for Scotland. If they can't even show basic respect for their own colleagues, what chance do the rest of us have? The fact is, Westminster thinks Scotland doesn't need to be listened to, can be ignored, and now we're being told we have to thole a Prime Minister that his own colleagues think is not fit for office. Presiding Officer, independence is fundamentally about empowerment and aspiration. But you know what? An added benefit of being independent is that we'll no longer have to put up with being treated like something on the sole of Westminster's shoe, and I suspect today even Douglas Ross finds that a really attractive proposition.
Nicola Sturgeon speaking to the Scottish Parliament earlier. Let's speak to Adam Morris, the former head of press for the Scottish Conservatives. Adam, a very good afternoon to you. What were your impressions last night when you heard Jacob Rees-Mogg both calling Douglas Ross a lightweight and insignificant?
Yeah, pretty remarkable. I mean, Douglas Ross isn't a lightweight, even as Nicola Sturgeon referred to there in your clip. She's never even called him that in the time that they've been adversaries, and neither have the Labour Party in Scotland. So it's the first time I've ever heard Douglas Ross being called a lightweight, and to hear that from somebody who's fairly senior in his own party is pretty surprising.
Kind of Scottish Conservative relations to Westminster Conservative relations.
Yeah, I mean, they'd actually been in a good place ever since Ruth Davidson was in charge. She had really good relationships with David Cameron and Theresa May. Obviously, when Boris came in, things have been strained. And, Douglas had a decision to make. I've heard some of your guests, including Christopher Chope there, say that he suggests he shouldn't have done that. But the MPs that are backing up Boris Johnson, they can hide now. They never really have to face the music. They don't have to face press conferences. They don't have to stand up in Parliament often and hear this. Douglas Ross has to put his chin on the line all the time. Today being a classic example. And if he hadn't done that, every day between now and the end of time, he would be asking why he's backing up a Prime Minister that broke the rules he expected everybody else to live by.
Fascinating point indeed, Adam. And just finally, what do you think are the wider implications actually for the union? How damaging is this potentially for the union? The perception, I would have assumed in Scotland, about the words that Jacob Rees-Mogg uttered yesterday.
Bad, because there's council elections coming up in Scotland in May, and in the next few weeks, the opponents of the Conservatives will be printing their leaflets, and on every single leaflet you will see the word lightweight with Douglas Ross, probably across Douglas Ross's forehead. And if that election doesn't go well for the Conservatives, that will reflect badly on the party. And it's completely self-inflicted. So, yeah, and that's serious. If the Scottish Conservative Party, who stand on a permanent ticket of keeping the union together, don't perform well, then that is bad for the health of the UK.
Adam, appreciate your time and analysis. Really good stuff. Adam Morris there, who's the former head of press at the Conservative Party in Scotland. OK, let's move away and just end the programme actually on Brexit, because the UK and EU have resumed talks on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Liz Truss has just held her first face-to-face meeting with the EU's chief negotiator, and our Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie has been following events from Stormont. Dougie, very good afternoon to you. Just bring us up to date with what's been happening today.
Well, today's all about dinner, wine and dine. It's get-to-know-you type day, and then tomorrow will be the sort of official talks and round-table stuff that really take place. But I think Liz Truss will probably be keeping an eye on what's going on in Westminster as well, because she is being muted with a top job in there, the top job. And when I'm standing here and looking at this behind me, I tend to think that she might be better coming at this at a different angle. Brexit and the protocol has taken many big scalps in the Tory party, and it's all because they didn't strike quick enough when Brexit happened, or when they hesitated or tried to help the EU.
And those negotiations are crucial, aren't they? Because we know that there's the possibility of triggering Article 16. Suggestions that the end of February has kind of been a time in which something needs to happen. But there is pressure from the DUP and others to do it now.
The pressure from the DUP is coming because there's elections coming to this behind us, and the whole problem is around consent. That's the problem. The Good Friday Agreement was built upon the basis of consent. The protocol basically took out the Act of the Union, so it means that they have been changed without the consent of the people. The DUP are threatening to bring these institutions down. They're going to come down at the end of March into April anyway, in front of an election. So the DUP will be weakened greatly by this that's happened here, and I think they're looking to Liz Truss to hand them a political lifeline.
Appreciate it. That's our Northern Ireland reporter there, joining us from Stormont. Thank you very much indeed. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch. We always want your views, gbviews at gbnews.uk, particularly on Partygate. Joanne says no one is asking the question about who is held on to these revelations for 2 years and only reveal them because they want Boris out. No one seems too bothered about how this has all come about. Mark says, with regard to those who took their drinks into the Downing Street garden and then kept socially distanced, why is it okay for them to work inside of Downing Street and maybe drink 2 metres apart? Sean says, I believe we should be calling for everyone who attended that party to resign, not just Boris. And John says, before people cast their stones, they should look back to May 8th themselves, VE Day, and recall what they did. Did they take part in a boozely, socially distanced street party? OK, that is it from me for today. Arlene Foster is back at 3 o'clock tomorrow. I'm here on Monday at the same time. Colin Brazier's up next. But first, here's the latest weather from the Met Office.
Hello again. A fine winter's day out there for many of us with plenty of blue sky, but there will be some frost and fog forming overnight, especially where we've got the clear skies today. The one exception, Scotland, where tighter isobars around the periphery of this high is leading to stronger winds, and as these weather fronts approach, some more persistent rain arriving later on in the afternoon and overnight. Initially for Shetland, then into Orkney by the evening, and then eventually into the far north of the mainland. That strong wind accompanying the rain as well, so quite a contrast here compared to further south, where across much of England and Wales, lighter winds and clearer skies will lead to some widespread fog and frost as we start off tomorrow morning. Temperatures, even in towns and cities, several degrees below freezing, so really quite a cold start across much of England and Wales tomorrow morning. And watch out for those dense fog patches, especially for the West Midlands, into the Welsh Marches, the West Country as well. Some of these could persist into the early afternoon. But away from those, plenty of sunshine breaking out across much of England and Wales. Some brighter spells for Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland as well, but thicker cloud and rain tending to fizzle out across the north and northwest of Scotland. It's mildest once again in the northwest of Scotland, 10 degrees here. Feeling quite cold further south, especially where we get that lingering fog. Temperatures really struggling through the daytime. And then that fog reforming once again on Friday evening and into the early hours of Saturday. Most extensive as we start off the weekend across eastern England and perhaps the Midlands as well. Elsewhere, some low cloud and mist in the south, and for Scotland and Northern Ireland staying generally cloudy but milder here, whilst a widespread frost once again is expected across parts of England and Wales on Saturday morning. So chilly start to the weekend with that frost, and a gloomy one, especially in the east and across the south with areas of low cloud, mist and fog. And it's a cloudy theme through this weekend, but some areas will be lucky enough to see some sunshine, particularly in the north and particularly on Sunday.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hi there, very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Brazier, fast-paced news from 4 until 6. In the next hour, with Scotland's Tories in open revolt against the leadership of Boris Johnson, what does that mean for the Conservative and Unionist Party, as it's still technically called? Amid the hue and cry over Number 10's COVID party, did anybody notice that COVID cases fell 50,000 yesterday? I'll take you through today's data as it drops this hour. And get voting in our spooky Twitter poll as MI5 outs a Communist Party spy working in Parliament. Are we taking Beijing's attempts to